Good afternoon, Darren. Pleased to meet you today. So welcome everybody to our first podcast, which is navigating a channel career as part of the channel community. I'm Zoe Chatley, the managing director of the Channel Recruiter, and today I have with me Darren Howe, who's the strategy and commercial development director for XMA, and you're also their ESG director. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Zoe. Well done on that job title, by the way.
I know. Thanks very much for that. I was like, just look down, just double check. It's the worst thing ever. No, thanks ever so much for joining me today and agreeing to be my first interview as well. So you're really special. You're my number one. I'm really pleased that you decided to come on today because, like the title suggests, it's all about navigating a career in the channel. We know with our wonderful world of the IT channel that not everybody has a natural progression into IT. Not everybody naturally thinks that they're going to, I'm going to work in IT sales or marketing or, or technology or whatever it is. So we're really keen as part of this sort of group of podcasts that we're going to do to understand how people got into the careers that they have had. And it obviously doesn't always have to just be the industry that we're currently in. But I think to showcase how people have got into the jobs that they're currently in, the work they've had to do, the ups, the downs, everything. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to be doing a hell of a lot of talking. So I hope you've got a cuppa available. But I hope that everybody today really enjoys it, and we look forward to hearing back from people afterwards. So, Darren, talk to me a little bit about your background. Like, I've got a lovely resume here on LinkedIn, and you've had quite a varied career. But talk to me about before, I suppose, the start of your career. Talk to me a little bit about your background, your childhood, and then how it kind of led into your first position.
Yeah, no, and firstly, thank you for having me on. It's great that you're looking to do these type of podcasts, and it's a privilege to be the first person. So I'm well chuffed. So where did it all begin? Well, let's just go back. So I'm actually was born and raised in Watford. And I think that's very relevant. Okay, some people might say and go, well, Watford means nothing to me, but it's relevant to my story, and I'll tell you the reasons why. But I grew up and lived there for about 6 years. And then we moved to a little village called Kensworth, which was in Bedfordshire. Lovely little rural village, small little community. Went to the lower school there, and everything's fine. With my two older sisters, they went off to middle school, and then I went and joined that middle school as well, Streetfield Middle School, which actually unfortunately is not around anymore. It closed. So that was sort of the early beginnings of where I lived and what I did. In that process, I started to get an interest in football, I guess. My dad was an ex-footballer, not professionally. He was semi-professional. Back in the day, the money wasn't what it used to be. So he played around for Watford reserves, etc. And he had a real vested interest in football. But I was a late developer when it came to being interested in it. So there are teams now, under sixes, under sevens, they weren't around when I was around in that sort of age bracket. So I was late developer. I sort of kicked the football for the first time about the age of 9. And I enjoyed it, went up the park. It was days where you used to go up the park with your mates, kick a ball on your bikes, and just have a little bit of a fun time, an enjoyable time. Started kicking football around at school as well, and just started to enjoy it. And then through the summer holidays, so I was about 11, I guess, and then they used to do these summer camps and summer holiday football camps where you'd get dropped off and you'd be there training. Coca-Cola used to do them along with others. I think McDonald's did some as well, mainly to keep us kids occupied back in the day than doing anything else. And I went, and eventually I ended up at a training summer camp, I guess, a couple of 3 weeks summer camp for Luton Town. So I rocked up at this artificial pitch complex and was running around with these players. And I guess for anyone who's met me, I'm pretty tall as an individual, and I was tall for my age back then. So probably first couple of nights or couple of days, and it went into the evening, these courses. But the coaches sort of started saying, look, you're probably a little bit too physical for the other people around you. We're all the same sort of age, but they just said, look, you're tall, right? You're as tall as we are.
Yeah.
Do you fancy going over to and on the other side of the pitch was what they called the centre of excellence. So it was
Wow.
boys from around the local area who've all been picked up from sort of Luton, Bedford, into the villages as well. But we're training regularly, and it was once a week training regularly. Better quality, better standard, a lot bigger. So I was moved over to there, and I trained with those for I guess for a week or two, and then the summer course finished, and the Centre of Excellence turned around and said, "Well, do you fancy staying on?" So what do you say when Luton Town Centre of Excellence turn around and say, "Well, do you want to stay on?" So I was chuffed. And then I continued playing in there. And then I think it was probably a few months of doing a couple of training sessions in there, or a few training sessions in there. And the guy who oversaw it said, "Look, do you fancy? Do you want to play? We've got a game coming up against Queen's Park Rangers Saturday at what was Electrolux, which was Luton Town's training ground at the time." And obviously you say yes. And I remember rocking up there with my father, and he was well chuffed. Like, do you know what? His lad's just been asked to go and play against QPR at the age of 11. And I turned up, and all of the players that were around me, certainly the QPR players, were like men. They were huge. And they put me right back. I played. We lost 2-0, but I did all right. And I remember after the game, when I was speaking to my father, he said, "Look, one of the questions I went and asked the manager, Darren," and I said, "What's that?" He goes, "I went around and just said, what age group is this? Because my lad's only 11." And they were like, "This is under 13s." Now, the golf for anyone who's got children or have gone through having children or have children who are going to get to those ages, the difference between an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old is quite substantial.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it was quite flattering, I guess, and quite humbling that they thought enough of me to do that. But that was my first game, and I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Amazing.
And then I just stayed on. So I stayed on School of Excellence. I played every weekend. We would play in the local areas. So we would play Arsenal's, West Ham's, Tottenham's, you name it. And then eventually I managed to sign, or was asked to sign, schoolboy forms. So the age of 14, I signed schoolboy forms, which meant no clubs could approach you.
Oh wow! So you were locked in then.
I was locked into Luton at that point, and then I stayed at school. So I still did school. I did very well in the county teams as well alongside that. And at the age of 16, after I completed my GCSEs, which I did all right, I wasn't an A-class student. I got an A in PE because I just enjoyed
naturally.
PE. I think football got me through that, to be honest. Did well in maths, but everything else was sort of C. At that time, it was the C grades, which I don't even know what the new scoring is.
Numbers now, isn't it? 1 to 9, I think. Yeah.
Well, I think when our kids went through it, it's bizarre. So I think a C is equivalent to a 3 or 4 or something like that. It's slightly reversed. But anyway, so I did all right in school, but I wasn't overly academic. But I did my GCSEs, and then I signed what they call a youth trainee scheme, so YTS.
Okay. Yeah.
Which meant I left school, I then become an employee of Luton Town. So I was in the club every single day as the equivalent to a professional footballer would be. But at the age of 16, that's a really big jump. It's a big leap, right? Because we're the youngest in that. I think there was about 15 of us. We were the youngest in that club, and you've got then players and professionals right up to the age of 35. You've then got the coaching staff. You've got experienced management and coaching. So the kicking the football around in the playground, or having a kick about with his mates up the park suddenly changes. Okay, and you become this requirement of, I've got to be probably older than my years. but I've also got to step up and start to think about actually what does this even mean? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to the people around me? And you've got to start to then you understand what teamwork is, you understand what working hard is, you understand what those sort of values and ethics are because they're drilled into you. And you've got to do that.
It's quite militant, really, isn't it? To a degree.
It is. So the football industry is I would say it's no different to being in the military. I would say ironically, and this sounds really perverse, so please take it for what it is. It's not too dissimilar to then, I guess, being in that sort of in prison, and then when you come out of it, it's everything's alien to you because you have been you follow a set regime, you follow a set process, a set structure. It's not overly strict in a number of ways, but there is an expectation of you.
Of course.
And you've got to maintain your standards to that expectation. You've got to make sure that you are, without fail, you're at those standards expected of the management staff, expected of your teammates, because you're only letting them down as much as you're letting yourself down.
Which makes sense. And you're paid at this point as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I was paid the £60 a week. I know.
Coining it back then, I bet though.
At that, I had to run a car. So I passed my test. I was running a car. Fortunately, I was living at home because where my parents lived, it was close enough to the club that I didn't have to be in digs. So I didn't have to stay away. But yeah, I'd still have to drive a car to and from work. You still have to have your lifestyle, whatever that looked like. So we weren't not allowed to go out. We weren't not allowed to go and do things. But equally, when you're on £60 a week and you've got all those outgoings, life wasn't particularly lavish, put it that way, and the expectation of being lavish was minimal. And we went through, so we were pretty successful as a group of individuals. We won the League Cup, we won the league. So we beat in the League Cup, we beat West Ham over 2 legs, which was a great result. Some really good players. Joe Cole was in the team, so he's a pundit now, sitting on commentating, and I played against him. And then I was transferred off to Cambridge United. So in 1998, I joined Cambridge United. Which was a completely different setup, I guess. Luton were probably a little bit more forward-thinking than Cambridge at the time. So Cambridge was a little bit, I guess, behind the times with the thinking of the eating that you did during the day, the training regime you had during the day, etc. But I had a couple of decent years at Cambridge. I was living away from home, so I'd moved out by then. I was living in the digs in Cambridge, so that was a challenge and difficulty. But then eventually I moved up to Norfolk. I had a couple of horses, so I was, I guess I was privileged enough to have a couple of horses. I loved that sort of, I guess, lifestyle.
A bit of freedom, I suppose, as well. It's very different to football horse riding.
Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to ride them. I wasn't.
Automatically assumed.
Yeah, I wasn't. 3 things I wasn't allowed to do: ski, motorbikes, or horse riding.
Well, I suppose if there's any damage to you, then makes sense.
But you're right in the freedom. The freedom was about actually taking care of them. It was about mucking them out. It was about having the land and space around, and actually the reprieve away from everything that was hectic in just being able to spend time with. Horses was mine, but I guess any animals. A lot of people find a lot of comfort out of spending time with animals. So I had horses, so I was privileged to have horses. I bought a house. Just outside Swaffham in Norwich. I couldn't afford anything near Cambridge. Far too expensive for me. But and just
for anybody.
It's just.
But an 18-year-old on £60 a week, or did you get a bit more at this point?
I was on more money then. Yeah, I was on more money.
Okay.
So I had I was on a half decent wage. It wasn't anywhere near what you would see on football these days.
No,
but it was enough.
Still.
It was enough to get a decent house. It was enough to maintain a lifestyle. And then I was playing in a game. I got smashed in the game against York City, which, for all intents and purposes, sort of ended the career. I guess glass ankles was my nickname when I was going through my football career. I was
Right.
pretty often I would turn an ankle, not for any reason that they weren't weak or anything. It just so happens.
Yeah, yeah,
It's part of the parts of the sport, and
yeah.
so my ankles were particularly weak as it was, and I got smashed in the game, and I sort of got told, look, this isn't going to work for you. Training at this sort of level, it just isn't going to. Your ankle's just not going to keep up with it. So
Yeah.
Cambridge and myself, we parted ways on that basis.
Mhm.
And it was, do you know what, that was tough. Okay, so
Yeah.
football had been my life. It was hard work, and
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
pretty dark, I guess. And to have all
Yeah,
that
I
sort
can
of career,
imagine. Yeah. And how old were you at this point when that happened?
just 20.
Yeah, so really, like, before everybody sometimes thinks as a 20-year-old as being, a grown man at that point, but we know that you're not. You're still a child at this point. You're still
Yeah.
finding your feet. So that must have really hit you quite hard, and not
It was,
knowing what to do next.
and that's exactly what it was. Right, it was dark, and
Mm,
your listeners don't want to know how dark it was, but it was dark,
yeah, no,
and again, it's one of those days you can sort of remember. You sort of at one point you sit there and think you've got to make adjustment and change here. You've either got to do something or you're going to
yeah,
spiral out of control. And I had been playing in the lower leagues at that point, so I'd started playing for Wisbech Town. I
okay,
was doing some stuff for Dis Town, but it wasn't working out as I
mhm,
wanted it to work out, and it just created even more of a problem because you're hanging on to a career that just
mm,
isn't going to materialize back to where you want it to
yeah,
be or where you've
yeah,
experienced. Um, so I'm now a 20-year-old lad, not with hardly anything coming out of school.
yeah,
Um, I haven't really been looked after by the Professional Football Association. I haven't been
no,
looked after necessarily by any training or given any
yeah,
guidance on how you deal with this. Um,
mm.
it was difficult. It was a challenge, and
Yeah, I can completely appreciate that.
you sort of get to the stage where you go, you need to find a job, and everyone used to call it
Mm.
a real job. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was that was always difficult to take. And again, going back, you're talking early 2000s, so it was 2000,
Mm.
2001. There
Yeah.
wasn't a huge
Great
amount
era,
of
by the way. It's a good era.
it wasn't, but there wasn't a huge amount of opportunity for a 20-year-old who didn't have a huge amount of
Okay.
skills.
Yeah.
Um, I looked at delivery driver jobs. You had to be
Hmm.
25 to be insured.
Right.
Even getting into employment into supermarkets, so it was a real challenge. And
Yeah, yeah.
I sort of sat and thought to myself, thought, right, okay, rather than just go scattergun at anything,
Mm.
what am I good at? What am I
Yeah.
strong at? What do I know where my strengths are? So I knew that
Yeah.
I was a team player. I knew I could
Yeah.
communicate really well. I liked speaking to people and talking to people because it was part
Yeah.
and parcel of the job. And I enjoyed cars. So
Okay.
I sat and thought, well, okay, well, how do I put all those together? And I came up with a motor trade. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know anything about the motor trade, but I applied for a job at Audi in Kings Lynn at the time, and
Brilliant.
I didn't get the job. But but
But it was the start of something.
well, it's interesting. This is about, and again for your listeners, this is about sometimes horizons open up for you, and sometimes it's about
Yeah.
just trying to find those horizons.
Yeah.
The sister company of the Audi dealership was a Fiat dealership, and there was a guy
Okay.
called
Yeah.
Neil Clark who worked there, and
Hmm.
he had just got his first managerial job at the age of 25, I think 26, 27, something like that.
Yeah.
And he was looking to take on a sales team that had never sold cars before because he wanted to teach them his way
Okay.
and the right way of selling cars.
Yeah.
Um, and he reached out to me and said, "Look, you didn't get the Audi job, but do you fancy a conversation about Fiat?" And I said,
Amazing. Yeah.
"I would absolutely." And I went down to see him. We had a little bit of negotiation about giving up football because I was playing for Luton Town then. I said, "Look, that's the easiest decision I had to make." So I hung my boots up at that point in full.
Yeah.
And I started in the motor trade.
Yeah. Brilliant.
And it has to be probably one of the best decisions I made at that point in time. I learned so much in that
I
time.
bet. Yeah. And I've got to say, actually, for a 20-year-old who had a flourishing career in football that obviously you medically had to really withdraw, to think that sort of logically, and albeit obviously mentally, your mental health took quite a hit. And back then, I imagine there was absolutely zero support for you. And although we're a lot better at it now, we've still got a long way to go. You know, I can imagine that there are still a lot of footballers in your position, in like that position now, who were going through that. So I think it's a really important thing to sort of bring up, actually, that, you know, although there's a lot more access to help now and support, back then it's a real thing for you to actually admit that you went through a really dark time, but you sat down and you worked out what you were good at. And I think a lot of people actually struggle to do that. And it's conversations I have with people all the time is, you know, think about what you're good at and what you enjoy. And that's exactly what you did. So to get into the motor trade. So yeah, talk to me about that then. You got your first job. You were probably on more money, although I know the motor trade still doesn't pay great base salaries. It's all on the commission. So
It is
talk to
on
me
the
about that.
commission. Yeah, so I and just going to your point, you're absolutely right. There was no support around mental health back then.
No.
And that's why I'm a massive promoter about giving back these days, and a massive promoter about mental health.
Good.
Big
Yeah.
supporter of supporting people back into employment, and we can get to that in a bit anyway. That's what I do in my day job today, because I've lived it. Okay,
Yeah.
and don't get me wrong. People say, well, you're an ex-professional footballer, so you had that privilege. I did have that privilege. Okay, I don't take that away, but I've also seen what rock bottom looks like. I've seen probably deeper than rock bottom, and it's not a great place to be for people. And
No.
look, if anyone can just take what they're listening to today and just be able to do something about it, then it works. Okay, but going back, so yes, I motor trade, Fiat. It was probably the best year, 18 months of career. Certainly at that point, I started to work with, again, Neil, I just mentioned. So he was a sales manager, and he started to teach me about the way of just being curious and understanding and listening and talking to people. Like when customers are coming in, really just understand what they're after, ask the open questions, and really start to look at it in that way. And I was successful at it. It always sticks in mind. I sold 11 cars in the first 8 days of being there. Okay,
amazing.
phenomenal return. But on the 11 cars in 8 days. On the 9th day, I went and did a relief over at Vauxhall, which was another sister company. And I remember the sales manager there saying, "You're new to this, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm new to this." But I sold 11 in 8 days. And he said, "Yeah, don't hang on that." He goes, "Because there's some droughts you'll have in this." And I tell you what, I didn't sell one for a month and a half after that. A month and a half.
Or you're crashing back down to earth.
But it just demonstrates that you can have your peaks and you can have your troughs, but that really doesn't matter. Okay, after a month and a half, again, I got back onto it and did the numbers I need to do. Unfortunately, Fiat closed. It was part of the Co-op group, so they closed their motor dealer at that time. And I just spent probably the next four years kicking around in the motor trade. So I spent some time at Honda. I did some time at Vauxhall. And then I became sales manager at the age of 25 for Nissan over in Great Yarmouth, which was a nice thing. And part and parcel of that was, as I went through that era of career, and one thing I'd learned probably a little bit in football as well was, to progress, you have to look at the people around you, right? You have to look at the people that are doing maybe better than you, and look at what they do that you think, oh, do you know what? I like that. I'm going to absorb that into my psyche. And that bit I don't like what they do, and I'm not going to use that. And you look at the people that are not performing around you as well, and the reasons why, and you start to then build your own personality. You start to build your own way of doing things. And I did that, and that made me successful. It got me to Nissan as sales manager. And then I decided that actually motor trade, I had completed quite a bit in the motor trade at that point, and I wanted to change. I wanted to do something a bit different. I looked at what I was doing, and somehow, I don't know how, I don't even know where the thinking was. My conclusion was that I wanted to go into finance, and I wanted to go into.
Chalk and
into
cheese.
banking. I know.
It's good to get some real coverage in your career, though. I suppose there are some similarities. Some people take out contracts, don't they, and finance agreements, and I imagine you did some of that. So yeah, but how did that happen then?
But the interesting one is that there is a loose connection in finance, but actually, when you're working in banking, if you take commercial banking and corporate banking, so it's different to retail banking. So you and I going into the bank, okay, and dealing with someone behind the counter, that's a retail element, okay, and that's different to where I was heading. I ended up in the commercial banking and the corporate banking arena, which was talking to businesses and dealing with businesses. And actually, when you think about the motor trade and you think about banking in that industry, you're dealing with people, you're talking to people, you're being curious, you're understanding what they're after and what they want to try and do, where they want to take their business in due course. And then actually what you're doing is you're facilitating that by looking at different product suites, looking at different services, looking at different fee structures, etc. It aligns to the motor trade in an ironic way.
No, it does.
It's
sales, essentially, isn't it?
You're selling money, you're selling products, you're selling services. But it was great. So I spent some time. I was at the most major banks you would have in the UK. So NatWest, HSBC, Barclays, where I went into corporate. It was probably one of the greatest times of my career. I did 3 years in Barclays. I learned so much from the people around me. I learned so much from the management. I got my head down. I worked hard. I brought in one of the biggest deals that they'd done in that year. And I was the youngest relationship director they had in point. I was at 28 at the time, probably 28, 29 at that time. So I was one of the youngest relationship directors that they had. But I did 3 years there, really enjoyed myself, and then was approached to go and work at Santander as a regional director. So I joined Santander, looking after their corporate book, which was up to 500 million turnover. And then just did what I knew best. I just continued the career of what I'd done before. And I guess so in between those stages, I'd also been considering what. So I go back and step over the piece about mental health and supporting people, and as I was going through that banking career, I was speaking to a couple of fellow colleagues who were about to retire, who also had the same sort of vested interest in I had, which is about supporting sports people. They were dealing with sports people, but it was not just sports people; it was people, high net worth people that had a short career. And we set up our own organisation. We set up an organisation to support those individuals in how do we elongate their careers. So we looked at mortgages, we looked at business acquisitions. We looked at different opportunities where they could buy a business and then they could elongate their career and length their career. And I left Santander to basically run that with those two other individuals. And
wow, okay.
It was interesting because that was a risk, right? It was a bold move, because you're literally throwing not earning anything and starting from scratch. And we did all right. We looked after a lot of professional footballers. We looked after a lot of high net worth individuals. Where it changed for me is that I guess I was of the age, what was I then? Probably early 30s. Very early 30s. And I wanted to take it to the next level. I wanted to take it bigger. We had a great story to tell. We had a great way of helping and supporting people. But the two gents I was with, they wanted to do something more locally, and that meant we parted ways, which was really sad because that story is still there, right? I went through it. You need to support young people who are going through difficult careers. You need to support military exit programs. You need to support people coming out of prison and make sure they're not offending anymore. You need to support, let's say, football and people who are leaving the sports industry. We don't do enough. So it was a shame, but it is what it is. And so at that point when I knew I was exiting, and again, you'll probably laugh at this, I sat down and really just analysed everything that I'd been doing, and thought to myself, what do I do now? Where can I make a difference? So I went for a head of operations role at the government. So,
As you do. Where was your head at when you applied for that position then? And because going from car sales, and I can see the progression into finance quite easily, actually, from car sales to finance, because essentially it is it's using those people skills. It's a sales role. It's relationship building. And I can totally see the business that you had. And it's disappointing that didn't last any longer. How long did you do that for?
Well,
The business that you had with the other two gentlemen.
I think we got to about 18 months.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I mean, doing that, I imagine that had real legs, actually, to go a lot further. I mean, you sort of alluded to that as well. Okay, so the government position then, what was the position? Why did you apply for it?
So Crown Commercial Service, which is it's a trading arm of the Cabinet Office.
Okay, yeah,
and
I know of them, yeah.
They had 4 areas, so corporate buildings, people, and then technology pillar. And so the technology pillar is based in Norwich, okay, where I was living at the time, or living around that area. And their role was for commercial and procurement. So me coming out of a commercial corporate environment, I knew nothing about procurement, by the way. Okay, I sort of scrubbed that from the CV and from the job description. I sort of erased that and thought, well, that's fine.
Glazed over it. Yeah.
I can learn that when I'm in the job. But commercial, I've got the commercial acumen because I've learned it through what I've done. Yeah. So I looked at the job profile, put my CV in, aligned my transferable skills to those, aligned what I've done and how I'd completed that. Went for a pretty rigorous job interview, by the way. And
I can imagine. Security checks for that must be pretty intense as well.
Yeah, they still are. I had to do a presentation and everything else, but I was successful and got the job. And that was overseeing then a number of frameworks of government by business or by opportunity through. They have to transact through a framework. I think I picked up the group of frameworks. I had about 1.5 billion was the spend going through there. Had a team of people, actively brought new people in. And I think I got it to about 3.1 billion by the time I had left there. I was deputy director, so I got promoted into deputy director.
Very good, yeah.
But it was all about just articulating yourself in the best way. Okay, like I say, I sit here now with only my GCSEs as what you would class as school academic outputs. I've done courses and stuff throughout my career in bits and got some accreditations in some levels, but I never went to university. And one of the things, and again, as I've spoken, you literally just have to adapt, focus, drive, think about what you're going to do, think about what the output needs to be, think about where your manager wants you to be, where the organization wants you this area to grow and go, and then adapt yourself to make sure that you're doing everything you can to do that. I mentioned it before, you just got to be curious. Okay, you got to be curious about what you bring to that business. Be curious about what ability you have, and how you can adapt yourself to and learn along the way as well. So I was 5 years in government. I had a great time. Saved millions and millions of pounds for the taxpayer through doing some great stuff on frameworks. Built spend profile, and then then I moved to XMA. Slightly different, I guess, is that I was approached. Someone I'd worked with historically just said, look, your work ethic and what you can bring to the table is absolutely where we need to be. Do you want to have a conversation about an operations director role at the time? And at any of
Yeah.
that point, I'd not done anything to do with ESG. So I joined XMA
Okay.
initially as the operations director in July
Yeah.
21.
Yeah.
So COVID had just finished. It was challenging
Yeah.
time through COVID for many, including
Yeah.
government. It was really difficult. We come out the back end of that, and that's when I decided that I was going to join XMA. So I joined as operations director, overseeing all their warehousing and all the logistics and everything that went along with that.
Yeah.
And then as a business, we made a decision that we needed to spend more focus. We were looking at social value as an element, but actually the world was moving forwards, and social value was just one small element of what is now known as ESG, or environmental, social, and governance.
Yeah.
And we made the decision to put an ESG director in, and I put my hand up and said, I want to do it. So
Amazing.
I added ESG to the operations director role, and it sort of went in hand, because if you look at internal processes and you look at packaging and waste and everything else, it all sits in that ESG sphere. So I had the best insight into how we reduce things. So we removed single-use plastics out of our packaging. We changed the boilers to more efficient boilers. We changed all the lighting to LED lighting from the old lighting we had, and we made big changes across the business, which was great. And then I have to smile because it just sounds like I chopped and changed. But as ops director, the executive board approached me and said, "Look, we want you to come into commercial and oversee the commercial element of XMA. We think you've got the relationship skills for dealing with the vendors and the OEMs, the distribution
Makes sense,
partners."
given your background as well.
Absolutely. Because operations, I wasn't dealing with customers, I wasn't dealing with vendors, I was just dealing with suppliers who were doing. And actually, the worth that I had was much more, I guess, and that was noted at the business. And they asked me to step over and take that role as commercial director, which I jumped at. It was a great opportunity. I had fantastic times in there, kept the ESG side. So we then went on to, so all the hard work we put in against the end part of 21 through 2022, we started to see some outputs. So we won Heart Radio Green Initiative Awards.
Nice, congrats.
Lenovo Partner of the Year Award. HP Service Partner, and the list goes on. We started to see a lot of these come through, and now up for Innovation Partner. Sorry, no, we're not. We're up for Most Improved Sustainability Partner globally.
Yeah, that was a mouthful yourself there.
And then up for ESG Partner as well. So
brilliant.
That hard work and dedication. Look, it's not me, right? It's not just me on my own. I can only give the guidance. I can have the ideas, but it's the people that work around you as well. So if everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, you've got clear communication, you get these great outcomes. And that's what worked, and has worked, and continues to work. So I now find myself looking after the strategy side alongside with commercial development. So part and parcel is looking at new markets and new opportunities. So I spend a lot of time focused on new AI software, bringing new opportunities for customers to look at how they can save money or save time, efficiencies. And I retain the ESG side, so the ESG director. So spending a lot of time in that space as well is quite significant for us.
I was going to say, do you work with XMA's customers on their ESG strategy and supporting them with that? I didn't know if there was going to be crossover to that as well, not just XMA's ESG strategy as a singular.
Yeah, so we do. So we work with a number of customers, supporting them on their strategies. It's quite interesting because we do a lot for public sector. So a lot of public sector follow strategies. So the greening report, or they'll follow, if it's the NHS, they'll follow an NHS strategy. So, but when you talk to corporate customers, we spend a lot of time looking at their ESG strategy and helping them with them. What we do for public sector is we look at their carbon reduction in the contracts. So we look at how can we calculate the carbon for whatever procurement they've completed. We look at how we can baseline their carbon. We can look at their carbon budget, so align their carbon budget to their financial budget.
Yeah.
because it's the way the world's going, is that actually financial budgets are becoming, they're important, but they're becoming a lesser of a thing. And actually the emissions budget, or the budget when it comes to carbon is even more important. So we support customers in reducing or being able to make strategic decisions about what to buy to enable them to reduce their carbon accordingly. So we spend a lot of time doing that.
Yeah. And I think what a lot of people don't sort of realize, there's two ways I think people look at it. A lot of people don't have a clue what ESG is, what it means. And then you've got the other half who obviously do know what it means, but actually are still, there's so much to learn in each point. I'm still, I suppose, learning a lot of it, because I think my business and and the way we work is more on the social side of things, because we support people in obviously their careers. But there is such an environmental impact, and I think people have to look at each of those bits, and they've got to now be more open-minded to learning and knowing exactly what ESG means, and then learning and understanding about each element and how they then can improve on it. And it's not something obviously that just changes overnight. These are things that take time and work and consistency. What advice would you give to people who are just starting to look at their ESG strategy, in terms of maybe, where to start, what to look at first, maybe what sort of guidance might you give?
Yeah, to funny enough, I get asked that question quite a bit.
Okay.
The first thing to do is, if you're starting from scratch, is keep it really simple. Okay, you can't boil the ocean immediately. So be really clear about what your mission and what your vision is. What do you want to be recognised for? So if you take XMA, is to leave a legacy that continuously improves people's lives. Because if you look at environmental, if you look at social, if you look at governance, and if you look at how they cross over as well, if you impact every single one of those three, or all across all three, you will continuously improve people's lives.
Yeah.
So understand what your vision and what your mission is. Where do you want to get to? What does that look like? Okay. And then break it down into really simple streams. Okay. The biggest one in environmental is carbon reduction plans. It's trying to there's a government requirement to get to 2050 at carbon net zero.
Yeah.
Okay. Is 2050 your target? Great. What's the percentages that you need to reduce against your baseline to get there? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we measure our baseline in the first instance? They're not overly complicated things, although they feel quite. The anxiety level. Yeah, the anxiety levels just rise when people think about it. But actually, it's quite simple when you break it down. In the social side of it is, and a little bit to your point, is what do we want to be known as for our staff and our people, but what do we want to be known as in our society, in our community?
Yeah.
And part of that is, do we have pay reviews? What are our benefits like if we want to put benefits in? Do we become a real living wage employer? Now, all those are sort of financial aspects, but even it could be as simple as, do we give our staff their birthdays off? Which sounds really simple, but it's hugely powerful as a message goes. And some of those can be really, really simple. And then the governance is, how do we report against it? But it's also recognizing how you can cross those over. So how do you take environmental and social together? So let's say you're a business and you don't know where to start. Well, if you've got old devices, so devices you don't use anymore, they come to the end of life for you as an organization. How can you get the data erased, and then how can you donate that into a society or into a charitable organization that can support digital inclusion, that can support someone taking that device and being able to do something with them to progress their life? And that could be being on the internet to be able to search for a job. It could be just communicating with a family member, because actually that means that's more important. If they didn't speak to them, then that could be the part of a demise that gives them those elements of the things that you can think of, and they only have to be really simple. It could be volunteering days. So there's a whole myriad of stuff that can happen. The biggest thing is, just don't try and boil the ocean, and just don't worry about it. Okay. Just be really simple, really effective, clear mission, clear vision, clear strategy on the page. That's what we've got. XMA, we have a simple strategy on the page. It's not complex.
Yeah.
Okay, it aligns to the UN goals because that's what we feel is the right thing to do, and I'll support anyone in doing this. But just keep it really, really simple and really effective. And then once you've delivered that, you then do your next stage.
Yeah. Brilliant. Excellent. No, that's really good advice. Thank you for that, Darren. And I think the other thing I wanted to touch on you as well, because I'm conscious of time as well, but you have a podcast that you
I do.
do. Talk to us about the podcast that you do, just in brief, and talk to us a bit about what you're doing.
Well, so the podcast is in partnership with Human Solutions. So
That's right, yeah.
I'd be wrong to say that it's mine, but I've been involved in it, which is great. So
Yeah.
part of my role is looking at how we add more value to our customers. So we want to add more value than just being an IT reseller, but we want to be able to enable people to start thinking in thought leadership, start thinking about things in a different way. And working with Scott from Human Solutions, we came together and said, right, we'll do a number of podcasts. And the podcast is to drive some thinking for people who are watching to think, okay, I can take that and I can put that into my everyday life. Now, the podcasts do have guests on there so take Luton Town manager. And we also have Brian Wood, who's Military Cross. We've got Simon Blake, OBE from Mental Health First Aid England. So we've got some senior people in these podcasts. But the relevance is around human-centric thinking. It's around understanding trauma, overcoming trauma. How do you get through difficult challenges in your careers? And then how do you overcome that and how do you come out the other side? And actually, it's really relevant to the people that are watching. It's really relevant probably to the people watching this podcast as well. It's presented by Scott himself. So Scott used to play with me at Luton Town Football Club. So he was my
I wonder
goalkeeper.
what the connection was. Yeah.
I hadn't seen Scott for 20 odd years. And I've been watching his career, and he was with EY and PwC. And KPMG, and we sort of hooked up again and said, right, okay, how do we bring what we're after together? And he presents that with Serena Guthrie, who is she's the ex England netball captain. So she's gold medal Olympian and Red Rose captain. So formidable team. But it's a really good, interesting watch or listen, depending on what people want to do. I don't want to necessarily plug that in main because
I know what you mean.
But it's the whole idea is to try and get people to think in a different way and look at how we can take role models to help us in doing that. But equally, how do we just take that and what people are saying and bring that into an everyday thinking, which is one thing we just don't do. I don't think we do enough.
No. And before we close off with my final question, I think what has shown throughout this chat today is, for you, you're clearly a very ambitious, tenacious and resilient person. And although there's been, different market sectors that you've worked in, there is a lot of similarities in, from your football days. Like you said, people saying to you, oh, no, you're going to get a real job. Of course, that was a real job. Of course it was. You paid for it. You trained hard. You worked as a team. You supported your fans. You take all those elements. But I think what I loved is how you thought about going from your football career into then your corporate career and progressing upwards. And it's through hard work, a lot of determination and resilience. And I think that's something, we've talked about this a little bit, and we could go on and on about it, but it's something that we don't see necessarily a lot of in the younger generations. So with that in mind, what advice would you give, Darren, to, our Gen Z younger generations that are looking to, I suppose, not just have a career in the IT channel, but land a career, have a career? What advice could you give them?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I think so. A couple of things. Technology has been a really good thing for us as a society, as humans moving forwards. Okay, it's been a good thing, but it does have its its pitfalls. Okay,
Mm.
one of the things I see for, I guess, our Gen Z age group is that because of technology, the ability to communicate, the ability to interact, understand body language, recognize facial movements, tone of voice, because everything's done on messaging. Like I know when I speak to my daughter, and she's 20, and she'll say, "Well, I spoke to my friends the other day," and I say, "Oh, great! Did you have a telephone conversation, meet up face to face?" No, I did it on WhatsApp. That's just the generation thing. So my advice would be, although that is a thing, you've got to be able to really try and push on communication.
Yeah.
Listen to what people are saying around you, act upon it as well. Don't be frightened to make mistakes. Don't be frightened to speak up. There is a nervousness and an anxiety level, I think, between the Gen Z population around I'm going to keep myself to my own little bubble, because actually I don't want to do that. I don't want to speak out. I don't want, and that's largely down to the ability to doing it outside of the working environment because of technology. And I'm not painting technology to be this really bad thing, but it has impacted the generations that are starting to come through much more than it did in my generation. I didn't have a mobile till I was 17. So that would be one part. Take every opportunity you have, own it, work hard. Don't be frightened to put the extra hours in. Sometimes you don't like to. Sometimes it feels like a bit of a ball ache, but it does mean a lot. And if people around you see that as well, then you start to be able to move within your organization quickly. But be curious, okay? Ask questions. Think about what you're asking. Look at what people are writing in, I don't know, an email response to you, and ask questions. Why did you put that in there? Can I just understand what that looks like? Describe to me what that means over there. Be curious about things, and then don't just be curious because it's asking a question. Absorb what people are saying. Actually listen to what they're saying and take on board and go, right, how can I change that? Or how can I embed that into my psyche? Or how can I embed that into my personality? So I think that's probably the second one.
Yeah. It's all about learning, isn't it, at the end of the day? You're not going to learn if you don't ask the questions.
100%, 100%. And then the third one will be is don't get caught up with negativity. And I say, how do I say this? In many organizations, and a lot for Gen Z, they may be coming into an organization where there are people of the same age as them because there's an apprenticeship program, or there's a program to bring interns in and stuff. And that's fine, right? Because you need to have people around you who have that type of support as well. But don't get caught up in the elements of it's just a next stage of university, or it's the next stage of college. The working environment isn't a prison, right? It's not a prison. However, you're there to do a job. You're there to listen, ask questions, and do the best you can at that job. Okay, so that would be the one, is don't get caught up in messing around, or get caught up in trying to be something that was a university thing. I had to do it at 16 when I left school, right? So I know how you can do it, and I know what it feels like, and I know how alien it feels, and I know how sad it can be sometimes. I know how fun it can be in other times, but don't get caught up in that. Okay, just get focused, get your head down, prove yourself, listen, ask questions, and push yourself. Just be that person knocking the door saying, look, I see that job's come up for there. Am I ready for it? No, I'm not ready for it. Okay, well, what do I need to do to be ready for it? We need to do this, this, and this. Perfect. So next time it comes around, I did all this. Am I ready for it? Just keep push the wallet, push the boundaries, right? And you'll see that actually the rewards come off the back of it. They do. They happen. So that'll be my three things.
No, and it's brilliant. It's a great way to end today's chat as well. And actually, you mentioned three words earlier on, which I thought were perfect for this as well. And this advice was adapt, focus, and drive. And I think everybody needs to do that, no matter what stage they're at in their career. But if you're just coming into your career, is adapt, focus, and drive. Absolutely. I think that's like the key takeaway there for people going into their next careers, or early careers, let's be honest, coming out of football, what to do. Get into the
Absolutely.
IT channel. Brilliant. Darren, thank you so, so much for today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been really interesting. And like I said to you, I just think it shows just what resilience and drive and tenacity you've got as an individual. And we need more Darrens, and especially in the younger generation. We need more Darrens. But no, thank you so, so much.
Sorry.
No problem. And I hope everybody else has enjoyed today's conversation as well. And we look forward to our next one. Thanks again.
Thank you.